This is Australia, a country with a lot of weird animals. You'll see spiders and snakes that you'll only find in Australia. When the British took over Australia, they realized that this land has a lot of weird animals. They also brought some animals from Africa and India, which we've made a video on before. But this video is about an animal that's only found in Australia, an animal called the emu, or an Australian ostrich. Let's start off in New York in the year 1929. The economy is booming. Everybody's getting rich by the day. Anybody that needs a loan, they can get it. The rates are very low, and everybody's happy. But this was too good to be true, because any balloon you fill up a little too much, it's gonna explode. At the end of 1929, the American economy crashes, and everything goes to zero. When something like this happens, the banks don't give out loans anymore, and that crashes the economy even harder. People don't buy anything, and that really hurts the economy. The American economy was so big back then that this crash really hurt the entire world. One of the countries that really suffered because of this was Australia, and they were nearing bankruptcy. Most of Australia's income is dependent on export, and when you can't export anything, you can't make any money. And the world economy was in a way that nobody was buying anything from Australia. At around this time, Australia had introduced their own currency, the Australian dollar, and it was dependent on the sterling British pound. And it's good to know, before this, sterling removed the gold standard that was behind it, and this really put a negative effect on the new Australian dollar. At this time, the UK wanted to help Australia for it not to crash any harder. But England couldn't even help themselves, and they both fell off a cliff. Before World War I, Australia gave its people farmland so they can start farming, and during the Great Depression, most of Australian population are farmers. But unfortunately, they're not making any money. That is why most of these farmers sold their land for cheap, and they wanted to go to the city to hopefully get a job. Most of the farmers left, and there is no more goods anymore. And that is why one of the farmers' biggest enemies didn't have any more food, and they were left hungry. This animal, the emu. It's good to know that Australia's national bird is the emu. The US has the bald eagle, and India has a bird like the peacock, and Australia got these little guys. Countries usually choose the most beautiful and special bird in their country, but Australia chose a national bird that they even consider it a pest. And that's because it's the enemy of farmland. It also has a very delicious meat as well. But because of the lack of farmers and produce, these emus were left hungry. First, let's get to know this animal a little bit. The Portuguese were the first people to write about emus, and they named it emus. This name originated from Arabic, which means large bird. Before we move on, we have to say that this is not a cassowary. Cassowary is also from Australia, and it's the most dangerous bird in the world. And if you try to fight it one-on-one, you will lose. The emu is very close to the ostrich, but they're very different at the same time. The Australian emu is very tall, and it could be as high as 2 meters, and it could speed up to 65 kilometers an hour. The ostrich that you usually see all originate from Africa, and even if you see it in Asia or America, it comes from Africa. Ostriches were around during the dinosaur era, around 80 million years ago, when the Earth was completely different and Australia was not isolated. When lands change, the location of these two changes as well. The African ones look like this, and the Australian ones evolved like this. But let's get back to the farmers. In the year 1932, when the economy was terrible, whatever the farmers planted, and when it got time for harvesting, they come out in the morning and see all their produce is gone. Something that you should know about emus is that they don't work solo. When they find some good food, they'll let everybody know so they could have a party. And that is why in Australia, they're considered pests and they will attack a farmland with ease. When the emus destroyed the farmland, they would have some leftovers. But up next, there is another pest that Australia deals with, and that's rabbits. And they would destroy the farmland even harder than the emus. When the farmer was confronted with this, they would realize that all their goods are gone. They try to call the authorities, but then they realize that it was the animals that killed everything. In 1932, millions of dollars worth of produce is being eaten by these animals, and there was a massive shortage in the country, and this is when the government gets involved. Their solution was not very smart. They tell the Minister of Defense, George Pierce, to come up with the idea to deal with these emus. George Pierce was the Minister of War, so all he knew was war. He went to the Parliament and announced that we should declare war on the emus. Most of the people in the parliament got upset about this because it was the national bird of the country and we just can't kill it. George Pierce said in return that we'll kill them with weapons, but we're not gonna make them go extinct. We'll just lower the population so they won't destroy our farmland and our produce. Even though George Pierce declared war on the emus, his army wasn't that big. He only sent 3 people, and 2 of them had weapons, and 1 was just a tag-along. At that time, most of the emus lived in Western Australia, and they started around there. It seems like the emus knew that there was gonna be a war. That is why they were coming up with some strategies. But they weren't very organized. Every time they hear a shot go off, they just disperse and run away in all directions, and when they run at this speed, it's very hard to hit them. Even though they had automatic weapons, the first day they were only able to kill 12 of them, and this is in a way where emus are always close to each other, and they're in a pack of about 50. The emus win the first battle, and with 12 dead, they retreat back to their base. These 3 that were appointed this mission felt embarrassed. With these modern weapons that we have, we could barely kill any of these animals. That is why they came up with a new idea. They suggested to bring a truck and they can get in the back of the bed and shoot them while the person is driving. But that was a terrible idea because it was a failure. This is a 1930s truck and it could not drive off-road. If you go a little too fast, it will get stuck, or at worst, it will even flip over. What George Pierce was doing and these 3 was turning into a joke, and people were saying that Australia is losing a war to emus. In the Australian Parliament said, the emus deserve the medal more than the gentlemen involved in this project. They eventually changed their strategy and made their idea work better. They said we have to shoot them so fast and accurately that they really can't run away. They successfully killed 300 emus per week, and we're talking about the 3 people that were originally appointed. After 1,000 emus were killed, they called off the mission and it was considered a failure. and the emus won the war. After this, the farmers really tried to battle with these emus themselves, but they couldn't do anything about it because there was a lot of them, and even if you killed a few of them, there was plenty more to go around. Then eventually, other farmers came up with the genius idea, and that was to put a giant fence around their product, and they don't have to deal with the animals. Not only did the fence block the emus, it also stopped the rabbits from coming in. Throughout history, there is another name for this war, the Great Emu War.